Hello, and welcome to today's Insight Live. I'm Jason Rader. I'll be your host today. Today's topic is understanding Gen AI from an operational perspective, and we have some rock stars with us here to talk about it with us. We have Carm Tagliente, newly appointed Chief Data Officer here at Insight. Congratulations, Carm.
Thanks, Jason. Awesome to be here again.
And we've also got Amal Agankar. Amal is our CTO in Product Innovation. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
So we got CTO, CDO, CISO. It's the C-level AI conversation today.
Right. There you go.
Covered.
What'd you say?
No, I just said, I think we're covered. We've got all the seats here.
Totally covered. We're going to get super nerdy today. Probably uncommon for the C-level folks, but let's see what happens.
This is true.
So speaking of that, you guys, by the way, if you want to comment through this episode, we've had a load of folks comment in the past, and it's starting to become a fun thing for us. So if you're watching and you have some comments, please send those in, especially questions. Also, thanks to all of you folks out there who filled out our survey. So when we were talking about this operationalizing Gen AI, we were talking about like, what do people want to hear us talk about? And so we came up with a survey. So what aspect of AI do you want to learn more about from our experts? And the possible answers were fine-tuning, frameworks, prompt engineering, or the singularity, because we wanted one that was kind of the outlier. Well, it wasn't the outlier. Nobody wanted to talk about fine-tuning. Frameworks was number one with 44%. Prompt engineering was 33%. And the singularity was 22%. So we're going to cover those probably in close to that order. But what do you guys think about the survey? Were you surprised about the fine-tuning aspects?
I definitely was. So I was like, I've been having customers ask me a lot about fine-tuning. When do we use it? How do we use it? How do we do it? Hugging Face, for example, is coming up with patterns to allow you to be able to do it easily. And I was like, oh, great. This is something we're going to be talking a lot about. But yeah, kind of interesting. But maybe not too surprising. I think in the general sense, I think because there is the conversations around, maybe the RAG approach actually is good enough. But I do believe over time, and again, not to prognosticate too much, but I do believe over time when we start to see the costs start to increase from, token costs, you may see fine tuning for cost advantages in the future. So we'll see. Maybe if we take the survey again in 6 months.
Yeah, no, perfect. Amal, any comments there?
No, actually, I wasn't surprised because I think we are in the crawl, walk, run phase, right? So everybody has heard of it. They know about it. They understand what it is and some, the capabilities, the risks and everything. But it's always, okay, what do I do next, right? And so I wasn't surprised that, if from a C-level perspective, they get, the team gets a marching orders like, hey, go figure this out. We need this, right? And where do I start? So I think the operationalization, is the next part. And after they go into that journey is where I think they're going to run into what, Parm said is, when do I need fine tuning? Because they'll hear about it, they'll know about it. But the easiest path is let's operationalize, the straight path. Most of the times we'll go on to that path. Now, when does that outlier, the fine-tuning come into play? And as I was expecting and I was hoping that people jump on the frameworks because that is the next step, right? Let's not jump the gun and go directly to fine-tuning. So
I love it. And I do think, fine-tuning, once people understand, because you can use fine-tuning in this generic way, and that's, people want to fine-tune what they're doing with AI, but fine-tuning specifically is something that you're right, would be on the run part of that crawl, walk, run aspect. So let's kind of kick it off. So from a maturity perspective, I think we probably don't need to explain what GPT is all about or any of that type of stuff. But I think prompt engineering, since folks were curious about that, let's talk about that in the journey, because that's probably the crawly aspects of this once you've kind of gotten some usefulness related to this in your organization. So who wants to tackle that first?
I can start with at least from when we're building applications or solutions around it. I feel prompt engineering is, like you said, is the first step, but it's also a very important step to understanding what does it really mean, right? It's a way of communicating with LLMs. So it's literally, it's a different mindset that is required to kind of, you're almost instructing it, right? You're saying you are going to do this and then this, but don't do this, don't go there. Like it's how I instruct my kids. It's like, don't go there. You're gonna fall down. Do this, right? Walk on this side of the road. Don't go. It's all of those constraints and restrictions, but also showing the path and and laying down expectations. I think that is how we want to communicate, and I think that's a crucial part of prompt engineering at a high level.
And you got good at it being a parent, right? You figured out the way that you put those right commands in the right order, or only give us a certain amount of commands at a time in order to get the results that you want. Just like when Google first came out, you figured out how to get the results that you were looking for.
It was interesting. We were building an application recently where to showcase the business value, and I had the prompt set up. Everything was working great, and then sometimes it would just give me a different output. It's like, wait, I told you what to do, right? And then I realized that I have to maybe repeat myself a couple of times in the prompt for it to pick it up. Like this was just experimentation. Like I was thinking, like, what do I do? I've told you that this is what needs to be done, and most of the times you do it. Then there are outliers where you don't do it, and then I wrote it again and say, this is important. You will respond to me in this format only. And I did that another time, and then consistently I got the same result from it. So it was so important that I need to repeat myself even to an LLM. Like, no, don't go beyond these bounds. You have to do this. This is how I want you to communicate back to me. And then it actually followed through. I don't know, from maybe Karm, you might know the details and internals of why I had to do that from a LLM perspective. But it was just interesting from an app's point of view to say, oh, well, it's just like a kid. I have to repeat myself a couple of times before it gets into their brains. So.
It is interesting because I think about it, and I agree with everything you said, and it is true. We have to figure out how to communicate effectively with the LLM, so to speak. But the thing that's a little bit different from search in the past, Jason, to your point, is like we had to learn how do we create the predicates so that we can actually use search to benefit us. But now what we're talking about is we're talking about language. So this is really linguistics, and it's really mostly focused on you have to be clear about the expression, and which is our normal human expression mechanism, and that's what event prompting is all about at the end of the day. And I would also say that the important skill to have, and I just did a talk this weekend talking about this, is critical thinking. So you actually have to be a good critical thinker to understand how to express exactly what you want, which is the point you guys were making. And I think that is a really valuable component of what this is. And honestly, to I think everyone's point, we need to look at this from, if I've trained somebody to be a good prompt engineer, then it's really about it's really focusing on that. And so learning this, I think, just helps us to be better as humans, so to speak. And I know I went a little esoteric there. Sorry about it, but in general, I think these are the important characteristics of how this works. So it's not a matter of tricking the model into giving you the responses you want. It's a matter of being clear about what it is you want and being able to express it the way you normally would.
All right. No, I think, and it's all about the prompt, right? I think so. Prompt engineering isn't just something when people are interfacing with the system. It's the way that anything would interface with it. It's all about getting the right information in that prompt so that it can give you the desired results. Like that, oh, this is important, or only answer me in this way. Those are hugely important. Hey, they're important with kids too, right? So I mean, again, it's that aspect, but that whole, I mean, pretty much what your role is as a user, or as somebody who's trying to programmatically leverage this, is to get the right prompts to the back end so you can get the results that you want.
Right. I think the other thing that's really important about this too is, since we're talking about prompt engineering, is because of the speed and the interactivity of this, in the chat model, you can now just say, no, that's not quite what I wanted. Like, Amal, you were giving this example about, when you talk to your kids, and it's like, no, I didn't want you to do it this way. I wanted you to, make a small adjustment. Well, that's kind of the conversational element of the way that we interface to the large language models today. And that really prompt engineering allows us to be able to do that. So we have memory, we have dialogue. You can, it remembers what it responded or what may have been the prior response, within reason, of course. But I think that's and also, or sorry, that becomes sort of, the way that we would normally converse. And I think that's really important to keep in mind as you think about prompt engineering.
Oh, very cool. So, I mean, we probably don't need to break down prompt engineering anymore from a technical perspective, tokens or any of those things, but we may refer back to that as we start talking about some of the other aspects. What about frameworks? I know that we all kind of had an interesting talk about frameworks. Everybody's pretty amped up about those.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about RAG, Karn?
Sure, and I know Amal, you're gonna have a slightly different perspective because I think we both come at it from maybe a different vantage point. But yeah, nope, and I want to hear his response because I love to hear it. But when I look at it or when I think about it, I'm thinking about these patterns and frameworks as it relates to the operational aspects of how we use these kinds of systems. So I like to use the term Gen AI ops. And when I use that term, it really is specific about what's the operational characteristics of it. So if I'm creating something like a RAG pattern, for example, then I can say,
what RAG is. Sorry, I didn't do that. So tell them.
Oh, right. So it basically, it's augmented generation, or basically response augmentation, and generative in the sense that this is embedding into the prompt. And that's what you do. So basically the RAG pattern is really just all about being able to insert some knowledge into the prompt as you before you send it actually to the large language model. But in those particular cases, the framework is usually the same. There's some model where you say, I want to be able to first obtain the knowledge that I want to use as part of my embedding prior to augmenting before the generation. And then I also, have my interface to the large language model behind it. But the key there is that I want to have some kind of a knowledge repository to be able to extract this information and use it as my augmentation. In the general sense. So that pattern really becomes the framework. How you do it is really just about selecting the right type of database, et cetera, and I won't go into too much detail. But there are the operational characteristics of it that really are also part of the framework. How do I update and maintain the knowledge base? How do I ensure that it's giving me the right type of results? How do I know that it's actually, has the desired effect at the end of the day? And then also, what's the performance look like in terms of the overall response? Is it doing what I expect it to do? So that is also part of the framework. So the monitoring, the management, the update, the being able to determine the efficacy of the response, that's all part of the framework. It's not just helping you do a better job of prompt engineering, it's the entire framework. So that's how I see the framework, and it's really sort of an operational perspective on it.
And I agree. I mean, there's always the ops part of it, right? And then when we talk about frameworks, let's say we want to implement the retrieval augmented generation pattern, which means that we, like Karm said, that we have to select the right vector database. That means now, okay, you have a database, you have an index, you have to index your data. Which data are you going to index? Right? So all of those decisions have to be made. You put that in your vector database. Great. Now you have a repository that you can actually go to and get the right context. Now you can always do this manually, in the sense, I go fire off a search, get that data, send it to LLM with the context, with the prompt, get the response, and do and show the response back to the user. But there are developer frameworks that are already in place. There is LangChain, there is semantic kernel. So you can build, if you like Python, you can use semantic kernel in Python or C#. If you're Python developer, you can use LangChain as well, right? So there are different frameworks that you can use that help you chain all of these methods or all of these calls that need to be made, so that you can essentially reduce your developer time, increase the consistency of your solution, get some operational insights within that code base, as well as how are you performing, how long does it take, did something go wrong, and is extensible as well, right? So if you're using, let's say, semantic kernel as a framework to build something like this, you can write plugins, right? And each of those plugins essentially you can have your own semantic functions that say this semantic function is reads a file and does X, or opens up a zip file and processes this, right? And so what you're doing then at that point is creating these nuggets, these components, right? And then you're telling the kernel you have all of these available to you. And when a question comes in, you can ask it to create a plan for you, which means that reading the description that you've provided for those functions, it decides which function to call in what order and creates a plan for you. And so you can execute that plan, right? So that kind of extensibility, that kind of acceleration that you'll find using these developer frameworks is, I think, real valuable, because right now with how the technology is changing and how fast it's changing, I think time to market is important. So picking these right frameworks to build, I think, becomes then critical.
And I think, well, semantic kernel is what Copilot uses, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's so it's like AI orchestration. Is Auto GPT is pretty much not the exact same thing, but a similar type aspect, right?
It's a little bit different, but it in the general sense, the semantic kernel is really about it. It provides an abstraction for the orchestration of what language model you're going to use at the end of the day. Whereas I think what you're describing is really more of the Auto GPT or those kinds of models are, and Amal mentioned this, it's sort of what are the set of steps? So like if you look at how these large language model actually operates, when the interpretation of the request is sent to the model, it first breaks it down because it has to understand like what are the components of what you're asking me, because it's very complex, right? So it sort of creates a set of steps. What do I need to do first, second, third, fourth, to be able to formulate the response? And then in those ways, then those sets of activities now become your sort of goal-seeking behavior, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure. But you then say, okay, it's just going to follow the sets of steps and then achieve the result, which is to give you the response, hopefully without a lot of hallucination at the end of the day. But yeah, that's kind of the
So if you look
differentiation.
at it from, semantic kernel, if you look at it, it's a developer framework that does abstract all the LLMs, so you can go to different LLMs. That's great, but it also allows you to add your own skills to it. So that is where that extensibility comes in. So if you're writing a solution for your company, you can say, well, I have this one SAP database here or system here, or I've got this one really old historian that I need to go and get the data from or get answers from, right? So you could write a plugin for that. And that plugin, you define your functions to say, go read this, go do that, analyze this, right? And you could write that code right in there, but then it's used in any solution that you want. And you say, I want that skill. And then when you get that data, do this with it, and then pass it over to this, and then finally pass it over to the LLM, which it can summarize it, do whatever it needs to do with that, and then get back the response. And I think that becomes key when you're implementing this in a enterprise, in a customer's environment. Essentially, is how do I make it useful for the business? Right? Everybody loves going to the Chat GPT thing and ask silly questions or ask whatever, like write me an email, great. But now suddenly, if I start using that with these plugins and all of that to solve a particular business problem, I think that is the real value there.
That's crazy. Yeah. No, and I do want to say, I was just trying to give a comparison of like Auto GPT to kind of the output of what's the stuff. The framework is hugely important for the semantic kernel aspects to your exact point. And I think that plugin paradigm is going to be super important as we move forward for the exact reasons that you just said, because I think that's where we can start to really leverage, because like nobody really cares anymore about Chat GPT. Great, it writes your email or those kinds of, what we care about is getting stuff done with this thing, and even putting in, maybe there's a manual process in the middle of it, but it can lead up to there, let the human intervene in some way, and then continue the process. I mean, that's like next gen awesome as far as being able to leverage multiple components, some organic, into the overall process, which is pretty neat.
Yeah,
it's kind of that classic workflow model, if you will. It's sort of I want to go so far, but then I need a decision point somewhere in the middle. And
Right.
I think there are a couple challenges that certainly we face as it relates to trusting the behavior, and
So let's
we
shift into
talked
the
about this earlier. Yes,
singularity aspect now. Keep going.
right. And right, exactly. And I also will tee one up for you just quickly, and we don't have to go too far into security, but I think the RAG pattern, just kind of getting back to that, and automation, because of the fact that we are doing, retrieval augmentation, for example, it means that there's a step in the middle, right? So there's opportunity for leakage, poisoning of the stream, interception. So some of the same problems that we had when, early days of just applications or even interfaces to databases, we had this injection problem that we had to think about historically. So again, I just figured I would mention it and see, what your thoughts are, Jason, related to that. And does this become maybe not an interesting pattern because of that?
Well, I think that's an interesting concept. From a security perspective, the more steps that you've got in a process, the more opportunity that you can break the process.
Mm,
And I think, especially when we're dealing with what, we already talked about hallucinations and those kinds of things. I mean, if depending on what these steps are doing and where they're going to get their data, are you going to really base some mission critical decision at the end of this with potentially something that was influenced by a hallucination 3 steps earlier in the process?
right.
And, you've probably seen all of those military movies and stuff like that, where they're like, oh, it's a 35% chance of this. Oh, it has to be a 60% chance before we're going to launch anything. Those kinds of things. That's literally, you've got to get to those thresholds. What is, are we going to have our firewall block everything at a certain point? Well, what had to lead up to those things? So it's kind of this, I always use the know thyself kind of aspects. These things are, it doesn't get like easy, like there's an easy button for all these things, but you can really leverage these frameworks and create the thresholds, understand your appetite for risk, and get it to a point to where it can really be productive. Would I turn my whole world over to it and then play golf? No. But that's where the way I feel right now. Start to tell me where we start to get really, really good. I mean, how many people are you guys going to base your life on a 99% chance? I mean, there's still that 1% chance. So it's one of those things where I think we're always going to have that human reasoning, or the computer's not going to take the rap for us. So, at some point, the risk is always going to be assumed by the individual entity, whether that be a person or a corporation.
So, yeah. Jason, I always think about, whenever I'm like building these applications, right? There is one part is hallucination. One part is somebody hacked my system and changed the data.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Now, how do you figure out, based on the output, whether it was hallucination or it was the data that was changed, right? From a mindset of, let's say, hacking, right? I don't really need to get into your system and shut down stuff. All I have to do is change the data there, and all of your decisions will be based on that data going forward. So now the hallucinations come in, and then how do we figure out whether, oh wait, was this hallucination or was this something that the data, and that's not right? And I always think that is what, coming back to prompt engineering, is those prompts have to be super, super clear and crisp, and using the right ways of describing what you want and putting the guardrails to say, so that at least we have a general sense, like, wait, if I get this output and it's above this threshold or something, it has to be that somebody has messed with my data, and it cannot be or a lower chance. Cannot is never a lower chance of the LLMs messing it up.
So the one thing I will say there, and this really has to do with sort of where in the process it actually is intercepted. But there's a lot of work that's being done in the research community in terms of determining response efficacy. So like you would know if it's a hallucination or not based off of because you'll know where in the event space you were able to get the actual probability of the response. So you can actually measure that. So you can say, was this accurate or not? So you can tell, eventually you will be able to tell. Today you have to use your own judgment, but in the future you'll be able to say, this was a hallucination. It shouldn't have answered that question. The probability was not high enough, if you will. But yeah, if you intercept it after the fact, then you can say, oh, well, was it a hallucination or someone messed with my data? So I think we'll get there,
Yeah.
but it's a really good point. I did want to sort of drive us into, because I have to go in a little bit, but I wanted to drive us into the singularity side of this. And so I'm going to sort of posit this because you were kind of going there, Jason.
Yep.
You said, well, okay, well, is 99% good enough to allow the automated decision-making process? And so I always like to challenge, people with this question. It's like, okay, well, Amal's brilliant, you're brilliant. I maybe trust you guys 97%. And so if the machine is able to do better than us,
I lost 2
right?
more.
Oh, sorry. But you know what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say we trust humans, and we probably, you ask me a question, I might say, I can extrapolate, and maybe Jason won't know if I give him this answer. And you might say, okay, I can trust Carm most of the time. But, maybe a machine can do better. And that's kind of getting us to the singularity concept. So once it surpasses the human's ability to be able to respond with high degree of accuracy, it's going to be better than a human. Right. So do we trust it then? You know what I mean? So it's like, it's really an interesting conjecture. And I think maybe a bit of a, how do we decide at what point do we really let it go? Because it's better than a human. So is it good enough?
That's when governance models come really into play at that point, because the
Right.
governance model affects the way that the AI is going to determine the outcome. If our model says we always err on the side of caution when it's human life involved, or those kinds of things, that's a different than, we are always going to do the opposite, shoot now, ask questions later kind of thing. So I think, but that's where, again, you don't do these things without kind of thinking about the governance model, the checks, the continuous QA that probably needs to go on in an environment where we're making decisions like that.
Right. And interestingly, we don't do the same with ourselves, right? So, and I'm not saying that it's
break this system.
I'm not saying we should, but we're like, we have these high sets of expectations for machine decision-making processes because we don't trust it. But I think with human conversation, how many times when you listen to a debate, for example, who's doing the fact checking? And it's like, oh, false, that kind of thing. And it's it is interesting, but I think it's good though, because it forces rigor into this process. And I think we become better in terms of a communicating society or decision-making society. So I think it actually helps us, and not the singularity necessarily, because I have my own perspective on it, but I do think it helps us to become better in terms of understanding how to interpret information, produce information.
I think if you look at how we are consuming these large language models right now, right? It's always, we are not, we don't have it running on your phone or on your home PC, right? We are consuming it from other companies that are running this at scale. So the singularity aspect of that, or making it more intelligent and making decisions and all of those, I have a feeling that it's going to start there, because they will have access to these models, they will have access to the skill and the talent, and they can add these additional models, right? It'll become, right now it's multi-model, it'll basically, all of the other models will then start to help on the decision making. So how many decision points that are being created right now, using that data to understand, what else can I do? So I think it will get intelligent. I don't think it's going to be this one large brain sitting in a big building kind of thing. It'll be more of like a distributed decision-making power that will act in unison and as one. And I think that is, I know that will happen. I don't know when it'll happen, but from a consumer's point of view, as us consuming that to build on top of, I always see ourselves as consumers. I don't think anybody else will try and tackle this on their own in the basement and say, now I have this super uber, AI model that'll do everything, because at least till now, from what I've read and understood, it takes a lot of power, compute power, electricity, memory, right? All of that, which is still a little beyond the reach of just anybody right now at scale, right? You can buy one, but you need maybe hundreds of these, and
right.
I'm pretty sure my wife will not approve me buying 100 of these.
Not another one.
No.
Yes.
So Carm, why don't you I know you got to drop pretty soon. Why don't you kick something off? Final thoughts. Where should people be focusing, or what should people be thinking after this conversation?
Well, I think the practical aspects of this are probably the most important places to think right now. What we could talk about the singularity, we could talk about what might happen in the future, which I think is awesome. But it's really more of a esoteric conversation. But the practicality of it is just immense today. So in terms of productivity, understanding concepts and knowledge. Sorry about that. My dog's going crazy. Good timing, right? But I think that's where we should focus right now. So really just sort of learn how to use it and understand what it actually does so that we can start to use it for benefit, certainly within our organizations, for our own personal productivity. I think that's the focus. And then event prompting, as the audience had suggested, is really a good way to focus, or prompt engineering, if you want to call it that. I keep saying event prompting, but in general, that's, I think, really good to understand how these things work, and then start to think about how do we evolve it moving forward. I think that's really the way to go.
Thanks, Carm.
Thanks.
You can go watch your dog, or walk your
Thanks.
dog.
See you guys. Bye. Thank you.
Cheers. Amal, how about you, man?
No, I think there is real value. I see and I understand why people think there's a big hype around it, and it's just hype. But I've all the use cases that we've looked at from a business point of view and implemented, there is real value. And I think the first step is, if you understand how do you operationalize it, what are the boundaries of it, right? And if you want to kind of do the cutting edge stuff, there are options there, right? So there is definitely value. Look at the operationalization aspect of it. I would say, don't jump the gun in terms of we want to do everything right now. Take a small business use case that has high value and start building towards it. And then slowly everybody in the team gets comfortable with it. They start to speak the same language. The vocabulary changes. And if you're looking at operationalization using the frameworks, that's great. Also look at how do you scale it out, microservices, kind of reduce your, if you want to measure who's using what in terms of applications, that is a good place to again look at. And so that if you want to do a chargeback back to the businesses, you'll be able to do that as well, right? So there are some business aspects of it, there are some operational aspects of it, there is some technical aspects of it. But the good thing is it's not a heavy lift, in my opinion. It's a pretty straightforward, easy framework that everybody can actually leverage right now and see some benefits out of that.
Nice. I think I have 2 points. One to that framework aspect. I mean, we were pretty early adopters here. We had access to it early. We leveraged it internally. We did a lot of cool stuff with it. So much so that now I'm looking back, like semantic kernel and other things, those frameworks, wow, those were game changers. And so I think it's one of those things where if you've already looked and you thought maybe it was too complicated for you, there's stuff every day that makes it really easy. Well, way easier than it was on the initial. I mean, there were things we had to figure out because nobody had ever done it before.
Right.
And I was just in a meeting, and I won't give too much about it, but what was really cool is we have stuff going on in our organization related to this use case. And this was the first meeting where we had another thing going on in the organization for a different use case. And we realized how we could bring them together for this massive cost savings and operationalization of these things. And it was super cool to kind of watch that all go down and to be a part of helping that, go across the organization. That stuff doesn't happen a lot in people's careers. And it was really, really awesome. So I'm just saying that it's absolutely worth the investment to take a look at this. And if you've already looked and it seemed too complicated, it's even easier now. And those capabilities and availability, to be honest, are coming around. And this isn't going away. It's definitely something you're going to need to leverage. And it allows folks that maybe weren't competitive in certain areas because of capability of people to actually get on par with some of the folks that had totally outclassed them from a manpower perspective. So absolutely. A lot of options. Go ahead.
No, that's why I completely agree with you, right? It's a game changer now. So even if whatever happens with the providers right now of the large language models, whether they survive or don't survive, it doesn't matter. The concept is here to stay. Somebody else will pick it up. There will be open source. There are open source models now that somebody will operationalize. So that concept is here to stay. It's a game changer. It's a leveler, essentially, like you said, Jason. I think that is so on point. And so even if right now you might not think of a use case, I would still say please do read up on that, understand how it works, understand the implications of it, because trust me, that use case will come and that light bulb will go off and be like, I can do this here, right? And at that point, you're not researching, you're in the mode of let's do this.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Amal. You rock. It's been fun as usual talking to you. We thank Carm for being here for the time that he could. We thank you guys for all that you do to support us. We love the comments. We love the messages. Keep those coming, please. If you want to know more about what we do, and we've got lots of nerds other than ourselves at Insight, please visit us at insight.com. Loads of stuff going on with Gen AI, data, all kinds of things, infrastructure that it takes to make this stuff happen. And we'd love to talk to you about it. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.